I would like now to introduce and ask one of our representatives here. I'm going to be speaking about workplace violence and the law in a few moments. State Senator Victor M. Torres Jr. proudly served in the United States Marine Corps. He is a retired New York City transport police detective. After relocating to this great city of Orlando, where we are coming to you at our symposium today, the senator began his career in public office. He was elected to the House of Representatives and served from the 2012 to the 2016 sessions, and consequently won another election as state senator in 2016. Senator Torres is proud to serve as state senator for District 15, which covers Osceola and parts of this great county, Orange County, Florida. Senator Torres serves as the vice chair of the Children, Families, and Elder Affairs Committee, and other committee appointments include appropriations, include general government, ethics and elections, military and veterans, space, domestic security, Joint Committee on Public Counsel. Please welcome to the podium Senator Torres.
In my life, I have seen the abuse of authority in the workplace. You know, as a cop in the Marine Corps, as a bus driver in Marion County, as a Lynx bus driver here in Orlando and Osceola. And how many times I had to tell a driver or a colleague, if that sergeant is abusive, file a complaint. This is the state has, or our agency, police department has, where you can go to and what you feel is happening to you as a person. First of all, I want to say to those parents that lost loved ones, it happens too many times here. Every time I turn around, a child for bullying commits suicide. And in my 20 years and 29 days in New York, when I came to Florida, this has opened my eyes to a new, I mean, New York is a huge place, a lot of issues, a lot of things, but coming to Florida and seeing the abuse and sometimes these young kids in their schools are subject to personal, and especially with all this Facebook, you know, texting, how it affects them and how they interact. These kids constantly face this abuse. It's just, to me, it's like, it shouldn't be happening. You know, the state has an agency, the Florida Commission on Human Relations, and I was able to get that department an additional 5 workers because their staff was like maybe 13 or 20 people to handle complaints throughout the state. And this is one of the issues that that department works with, workplace violence. But if you don't have the staff to go out and investigate, how are you going to solve the problems? You know, the leaders, those who are elected to office, especially the governor and the Senate President and the House Speaker, and sitting on the Children and Family and Elders, I was in the House, I did the same committee, and I moved in the Senate, I got into the same committee. And the nonprofit groups that keep on asking for help. Mental health issues, one of the biggest issues we have in the state. And it falls by the wayside. Parkland shooting, now all of a sudden, we got $69 million for mental health issues. You gotta be kidding me, man. You should have been doing this years ago. We don't have counselors, enough counselors in our schools. We don't have the wraparound program. Because these are the things that stop these violence. These are the wraparound program has the ability to find and to aid the counselors in what they do in the schools. Law enforcement only comes after the fact. As a detective, I learned that. After it happens, you're there. Now you gotta backtrack and find out why it happened, what were the reasons. This kid at the Parkland, he fell through the cracks. This should have never happened. And knowing a child like this, and to have him buy an AR-15 or have possession of an AR-15 is beyond, I can't understand that. I don't care who you're a foster parent, or you're an uncle or aunt or grandmother, and you have a child, and you know he has mental issues. Why would you give him a gun? He wants to practice? Well, go practice with the law enforcement. Let them take you out if you want to learn how to properly use your firearm. You know, in the 20 years and 29 days in New York City, the transit police, I never shot my weapon. 20 years, and I worked in the roughest areas of New York, never shot my weapon. The only time I used my weapons was to qualify at the range. That was it. We had the 6-shooter, Smith & Wesson, then they changed to the Glock because the culprits had automatic weapons, and we, the cops, didn't have automatic weapons, so they changed to the Glock. Even so, the training for us was intensive to make sure that we knew when to use our weapons and how to use the weapons. The workplace violence, are there any answers to that? Every day there's a new question. Every day we face a new story, a new scenario. Banning assault weapons, we've asked for that, we asked for it as Democrats. They said no. They issued that Bill 7026 to arm teachers. Most law enforcement agencies say no. We're not going to do that. As a cop, you're trained in law enforcement. If you're a teacher, you're trained to teach the kids. That's the bottom line. That's where it is. And I say to all of you, wherever you live here, get involved with the school boards. Make sure that they have ample counselors for these kids. Because you see a lot of the studies Mr. Stewart is related to with schools. Who's the person that's there with the kids most of the time? Teachers. And these are issues that teachers see every day. And they're abused. The kids feel sometimes that the teacher's authority is too much, but guess what? I grew up where you obeyed the teacher. If you had a problem, you went to your parent and said, hey, Mom, Pop, this teacher's, and let your parents handle it, not you try to handle it. But my thing is that I feel that we are moving in the right direction, but we need to do more. We need to make sure that the environment, and this is a right to work state, and that's a problem with most workers, with employers. I can fire you anytime. I've seen it. I've seen when you guys get threatened, like you could lose your job, it's your bread and butter. It shouldn't be that way. People should feel safe in their work environment, not abused and not threatened. That's one of the issues that happen, and that's why you get the violence you do, because the person says, well, I'm gonna lose my job tomorrow. This guy hated me, or I feel that he wasn't gonna, or she wasn't gonna treat me right, and they turn to violence. We need to address this, folks. We need to have more meetings, and I feel that more CEOs and school board members and superintendents should be on board to listen to what you're presenting. And it's just an idea that, to me, we need to act quickly and keep on pushing. This is the year, the Me Too, March for Our Lives. Those are issues that are happening in the state. And those are good issues to fight for, is to stand up for, and especially when we lose our loved ones in our schools. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I want to call up Mrs. Angela Sutner. Angela's beautiful son, Kenny. Beautiful child. Baby whisperer, he was called, because he could calm down crying babies. He loved the water. He was adored by his family. He was 2 pounds, 7 ounces when he was born, 2 point. So he had some issues to overcome, and he did. He was kind, he was gentle. He was bullied his entire life, at school and in the workplace. And on December 21st of 2016, Kenny couldn't take it anymore. And he committed self-murder. He was pushed because of the bullying. Frank Flass-Polar, who was the coroner in the small town in Missouri where Kenny lived, saw what happened. He read the notes, he met the family, and he said, something's not right here. He convened a coroner's jury, and a very historic event happened on January 31st, 2017, when that 6-member jury came back and found out that the bullying was the result of harassment in the schools, and most particularly at work Kenny worked. His supervisor was deemed principal. She was arrested, and in the first known case of a supervisor being charged with manslaughter, it was for Kenny's death. And unfortunately, a year later, the special prosecutor dropped those charges because of how the law in the state of Missouri is written. Senator Nasheed from St. Louis, near Ferguson, she introduced legislation this year called Kenny's Law, Senate Bill 791, which will, Senator, help to, if passed, and it's made its way out of committee, will hold those responsible for inciting someone to commit self-murder, including the cyberbullying that we see over the internet. Mrs. Sutner has, you've done so much for me. I thank you for your support, Angela, as an advocate, and she is continuing to work in order to ensure that no other mother has to suffer what she suffers. And our co-sponsor today, Bianca's Kids, which is a nonprofit organization in New Jersey, which grants wishes to children in need, has sponsored, starting this year, the Kenny Sutner Award for Bullying Prevention. And this month, they've named, in honor of Kenny, Ryan Burse's sister, Rachel, who has traveled here from the state of Kentucky. Rachel, would you join us please at the podium? Rachel is a graduating high school senior in Kentucky. Her brother Ryan, 22-year-old beloved son of Karen, who's here today, who traveled, stepson of Chris, father Tim in Ontario, went to work one day in Kentucky at a KFC, and an older, bigger bully went into work, wasn't scheduled, had a gun, shot this boy 9 times at close range and killed him. Rachel continues in her brother's honor to help to prevent bullying, workplace violence through the WBPI, through her school, and by founding the Ryan Burse Foundation. Rachel, I'm so proud of you. You are such a shining star. Unfortunately, she's decided not to go to school in Orlando. I met her last year when she came and she went on a school tour. She's going to go to school in Kentucky where she should be, close to home, and she's going to become a nurse. And this month, we're going to present you with, you have a certificate going home to you in Kentucky. You'll find it when you're home from Bianca's Kids, with a little gift card. But we have for you just something to remind you of your trip to Orlando. There's a certificate in here for your excellence in presenting and preventing bullying. There are 2 books in here that belong to Caroline Nozel. Carrie, we're going to talk about her case. My dear friend Jane, where is she? Jane brought 2 books from Wisconsin. Carrie was shot and killed after she complained of sexual harassment in Wisconsin. There's 2 books that belong to Carrie in there. Here's your certificate, there's other gifts. We want to thank you. You are a shining star. You are the future. We are so proud of you. Thank you for coming today. Thank you. What are our goals today? What is the mission in the next presentation? It is to help you to understand, to develop a working knowledge of how broad workplace violence is and who it impacts. It's not just employees, it's others in the community. We're going to look at some statistical data, provide you with the scope of this growing American tragedy. We're going to analyze some of the state and the federal laws, including criminal laws, because sometimes the incidents that occur in the workplace are crimes and they are not being regarded as crimes. And finally, we're going to look at some of the causes of action, the lawsuits that we see when plaintiffs bring workplace violence-related claims into our courts in this great country. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, an agency of the United States Department of Labor, tells us that workplace violence is any act or threat of physical violence that occurs in the workplace. It includes threatening, disruptive behavior, bullying, stalking, all the way up to verbal abuse, physical threats, attempted homicide, and yes, homicide. And we can see by the clear and unambiguous language of this definition that these are crimes in many cases. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, which is NIOSH, this is an agency of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, defines workplace violence as both physical, verbal behavior that's directed towards individuals on duty. OSHA, however, tells us that there are 4 general classes of people who can be involved in workplace violence, ladies and gentlemen, and they are employees, can be either victims or perpetrators, customers of the organization, whether it's not-for-profit, for-profit, governmental, high-tech, low-tech, medium-tech, service or industry, customers, clients, the difference between customers and clients are that customers are individuals that come in once in a while, maybe one time and never go back. Clients would be those who come in repeatedly. And then finally, we have visitors. Visitors into that workplace. It can be City Hall. It can be a store. It can be a high-tech organization, like we saw what happened at YouTube just a few weeks ago. A visitor came in mad and she shot several individuals. Those are the 4 groups of people that can be either victims or perpetrators. We have a severe underreporting problem, and this is the heart of the problem, the WVPI believes. We know that at least 2 million Americans are victimized by workplace violence each and every year, and that is equivalent to every man, woman, and child living in the state of New Mexico today. It is an enormous number of people. What is more disconcerting is what we don't know. I would not be surprised, and I base it on my 30 years of experience working in employee safety. I started out in human resources, had the privilege and honor of becoming a member of the Florida bar and the New Jersey bar in 2004. I have represented plaintiffs, I have represented defendants on a myriad of claims. I have researched and written on this topic since 1996. Based on my experience, I would not be surprised if the number were not tenfold. And Richard Knowles, he's in the audience, he works with the VPI, we've had this conversation, neither of you. You told me that you believe it's probably about 20 million people. 20 million. Look at the next statistic. Homicide, the 4th leading cause of occupational death in this country. In some professions, it's much higher. We lost another member of law enforcement this week, due to workplace violence. Occupational death is higher in some professions. Sometimes it's the 2nd leading cause, other times it's the 6th, but it's the 4th. This is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. Next statistic. NIOSH estimates that workplace violence costs American businesses $121 billion a year, and that is in lost productivity, in morale, turnover, insurance, repairs to the building when there's an active shooter incident, on, and litigation, and on and on and on. Imagine that is a significant portion of GDP. Where that money could go to better serve the American public, $121 billion. We work, the WVPI, with the insurance industry very closely. We have a very close relationship with the Agents of America, with Claims Magazine, with the National Underwriters Association. I've written on this topic, and the WVPI has for a number of years. They are very concerned about workplace violence. They're concerned about arming teachers. You know, what that's going to cost. They will not, a lot of the insurers are telling me, because they are in business to make money, not to lose money, and the risk is too high. And we have their ear, and we have written about this topic from a preventative perspective for a number of years. This was the cover of Claims Magazine. Stuart Silverman, I went to you and I interviewed you for this piece. A copy of the article is on that table. And they recognize this is a huge risk. And prevention is the only solution. And Stuart talks about the human resources related policies and procedures that can be implemented in order to be proactive and not reactive. My very dear friend Jane, if you watch Investigative Discovery this month, there is a documentary that she is quoted on, and Dr. Jim Nosel, her husband, about Carrie. Carrie was a 24-year-old young lady who suffered from sexual harassment in the workplace because she came into contact with a nightmare. He had severe mental health issues from when he was a young man. His intimate partner came to one of our meetings that we held in New Jersey, and she said, Kathleen, from when he was a little boy, he was diagnosed with everything. He was a problem. She said, I saved his life one time because he almost tried to take his life. And I'm almost sorry that I did. She said to me, Kathleen, I'm sorry for saying that, but I'm sorry that I called 911 after he took an overdose. What did he do? He went and he applied for a position at the same store where Carrie, 24 years of age, an equestrian, a bookworm, she was a credit. She would have made a great prosecutor. She was headed for the University of Wisconsin. What did she do when she suffered from harassment from him? She reported it. She did what she was supposed to do. He was being investigated by Madison police for sexual assault of another woman. Everybody was on this person, but what happened? They called him and said they suspended him. You're not coming back, we're firing you, because of a complaint that was made about sexual harassment. Put two and two together, what did he do? February 1st, 2016, purchased a gun. The next day, he lied in wait. And he shot that girl 3 times, one time in her head, one time in her stomach, and the third lodged in the book that she was holding. We've got to take these complaints seriously. We've got to deal with them from a proactive perspective. And Stuart, you've talked about this issue, about how important it is that we're not just only reporting, but we're investigating appropriately. Please, if you watch the Investigative Discovery channel, these incidents are so dangerous for law enforcement. You know, this guy, after he killed Carrie, he took off. He was running around Madison for the next day or so, and they found him. You can see, if you watch the program, you will see when Officer Michelle Walker tried to stop him before he could kill anyone else. He took that gun that he had used to kill Carrie, and he pointed it, and he shot it at her, and narrowly missed her. I don't know how he didn't hit her. I mean, it was just dead on. They finally took him in. These are people that are out of control. It's very dangerous for our law enforcement. It's like domestic violence, and that type of rage is involved. Prevention is the only solution. Let's look at, it's so important. Stuart talked about how important it is to get the information and to act on it. We're going to talk to you now about 2 mass shooters and about some of the information that they are putting up on the internet that we're missing. The Weiss Market shooter, guy by the name of Randy Steer, 24 years of age. All right, now, I want to ask how many warning signs that he put up in his multitude of things that he put on the internet. This guy had a YouTube channel that had the angriest, most vicious content that you would ever want to know. And he just wrote vile, and he dissected small animals, and he had pictures of himself with his shotguns that he named and that he would kiss. He walked into the Weiss Market located in Northeast Pennsylvania one day, and he did basically what he said he was going to do on the internet, which was to shoot someone. I don't know what I just did. I went really far ahead. But what he did, here he is. Oh, yeah, here he is. This is Randy Steer. This is what he put up on the internet that we found out about afterwards, after the fact. Photo of himself with one of his shotguns. He walked into that store, Weiss Market, Northwest Pennsylvania, June 8th of 2017, after midnight. He barricaded the doors. And he shot and killed his supervisor, who he did not like, and 2 other co-workers, and then he shot himself. This is what he put up on the internet for 9 months prior to. You know who his idol was? Here he is. This is what he looked like. If you could read his content. Angry, vicious, an injustice collector. The FBI has that term. This is a person who takes responsibility for nothing. Nothing is his fault. If he's late to work on a Monday morning, it's because traffic or because Dunkin' Donuts line was too long. It wasn't because they went out the night before and got drunk and slept in. It's because everybody else is responsible for their actions. And they don't take responsibility, and they forget nothing, and they forgive nothing. His idol. Does anyone know what the natural selection t-shirt means in the world of mass murderers? This is a t-shirt worn by the killer, Eric Harris, as he walked around Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. We don't have the actual photograph, but Randy Steer put pictures of himself up, and he talked about how much he loved the Columbine murderers, especially Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. He just went on board after board, and he wrote about it on Twitter and Facebook. He said, I'm going to do something. In one video, he's flipping a coin. Heads, I'm going to commit suicide. Tails, I'm going to commit mass murder. It came up tails. He is, look at what's on his shirt. He's got a mock-up of blood on his shirt. This is all over the internet. We are missing signs. That's the actor portraying the real killer, who walked around Columbine High School, April 20th, 1999, along with Dylan Klebold, and executed 13 people, and that was workplace violence because one teacher was also murdered that day, as we know. Where are we today? It took Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris 45 minutes to kill 13 people. It took the alleged murderer at our school here in Florida, Parkland, very good school, 6 minutes to execute 17 people. That's where we're going. And he also, Cruz also looked up to those 2 killers. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing on the internet. Here's another one. This is the Excel Industries massacre that occurred out in Kansas. And if there is a city where you would want to say, active shooter, workplace violence doesn't happen, it doesn't happen here. Cecil Ford was a native of Florida, very well known to law enforcement here in Florida. He had a distinguished career in crime, dating back to when he was 18 years of age. Battery, sexual battery, on and on, thieving and fights and everything. Left Florida in his 30s, went to Kansas, and then he continued his career in crime there. He was a convicted felon in 2 states, Kansas and Florida. Gets a job at Excel Industries. He is served with a domestic violence restraining order in 2016, February of 2016, a particularly bloody month. What's he do? He goes home, he grabs some guns that he should not have had. He goes back, driving along in Kansas on the way back to Excel Industries, shooting his shotguns out the window. He shot two motorists. I don't know how they were able to control their cars to get to the side of the road. They did, otherwise there would have been 2 more deaths. Continues on to go into the workplace where the night before a coworker said he got into a physical fight. Nothing was done about it with the coworker at work. This is what a coworker reported in the newspaper. Then what's he do? He goes in the parking lot, he starts shooting and killing people. He executed 3 people. All told, he shot 14 people. Who put a stop to him? As always, it's law enforcement coming in. Why do we invite law enforcement in only when there's a tragedy? Why don't we invite law enforcement in beforehand? Beforehand, to sit down with companies and schools and businesses and go over your policies and procedures. Every first responder I've ever spoken with says we would rather do that than to come back when there's an active shooter incident. In Kansas, the first responder came, and the killer now took his gun, missed, fortunately, one shot, and it was done. He wasn't done. He still had bullets in his gun. This is the type of rage, but what we're saying is, this is Cedric Ford's Facebook page. It's a video of him. What's he got on his lap? Frightening gun. What's he got between his legs? Alcohol. He is behind the steering wheel of a car. If we're seeing it, why aren't we reporting this? Knowing he's a convicted felon. And in my days in human resources, and Dawn and Claire, if we want to know what's going on in the workplace, we ask coworkers. They know. They are in and out of each other's business. They're seeing it, but they're not reporting it to where it needs to be. Here's Cedric Ford, convicted felon, out in the field in the middle of Kansas, shooting off a very frightening firearm where he should not be. Imagine, we've got to put systems in place. Think of the underreporting problem that we have in this country. Do we have systems in place to collect information in an appropriate way? Are we telling our employees, this is where we go if you have a concern in any way, shape, or form about safety? And then, critically, are we investigating appropriately? Are we dropping the ball? My experience, up to and including my current research project, which is called The Killer in the Next Cubicle, where I have looked at 161 of the most vicious homicides that have been perpetuated on American workers in this country, up to and including in January of 2018. I've looked and I've seen risk factors, and one is bullying. Bullying, if left unchecked, continues on, and it becomes an assault, and it becomes stalking and false imprisonment. It does not go off away by itself. If we can address that bullying problem, we will go very far in addressing this active shooter where it's involving employees in our schools and in the workplace. Many workplace violence episodes go unreported. Why? I know our law enforcement here in the room, we know that a lot of crimes go unreported. Think about, however, I worked for a short period of time for Public Defender's Office, and we would represent clients that had been charged with with misdemeanors, and they could be assaults. You know, assault is an intentional unlawful threat by word to act or do violence on the person of another. This is from our Florida statutes. I'm going to punch you in the face if you don't leave me alone. And it's the workplace bully, and he or she seems to have the ability to do that. And it puts fear within someone. That's an assault. Why aren't these, and why battery? You know, when there's a fight, when a bully goes up and cold cocks someone, that's a battery that's just been committed. If that occurred, I'll tell you, think of one case off the top of my head that I had to represent a client who was at a venue drinking a beverage, got into a fight with everyone around him or her, took that glass, plastic glass, threw it to the ground, the beer splattered up and hit the victim. That was prosecuted by the state attorney's office as a battery. Everyone who saw it picked up, called 911, the victim called 911, take that incident and put it in the workplace. If we see someone like Cedric Ford, where we see an office bully who's walking around and terrorizing people to the point where they're committing batteries, why are those crimes not being reported? Much less to human resources, much less they're not being reported to law enforcement. Why? My research demonstrates, and I looked at the 161 murders, I looked at stalking, I looked at harassment, hundreds and hundreds of cases. People don't know where to go. Their checks they're working. So they're concerned that if they go to management, they could get into trouble. The bully's now going to turn on them. If it's the victim, they don't know where to go, or maybe management dropped the ball before, and now no one is going to report anything. So things accelerate, until we have a situation, a tragedy, like we had involving Ryan, who was shot 9 times at work by a bully, an older bully, or Caroline, who was shot after and killed after complaining of harassment. People are not reporting the signs, and when they are reporting the signs, they're not being investigated appropriately. That is, we believe in the WVPI, and we are comprised of professionals from various professions who sit on the think tank. We've looked at this problem, and we believe that if we get the underreporting problem, we will go very far, ladies and gentlemen, in attacking and preventing further tragedies. Killer in the next cubicle. I've been writing about and I've been representing clients for years. You know, I've been involved in, I don't like to go to litigation. I don't like when there's a battery. I don't like when there's harassment. I want to prevent it. I want the systems to be put in place to be proactive and preventative. And that's how I've been from the day one when I worked in human resources. First article I ever wrote had to do with the harassment of our nation's workers, and that was published in 1996. In 2015, I learned about 2 employees who were television news reporters. One was the reporter, the other was a camera person and photojournalist, who were shot and killed on live television in Virginia by a disgruntled worker who had been terminated 2.5 years earlier. He worked here in Florida for a short period of time also. When I learned of that, I said, we've lost all respect for the dignity of human life, have we not? Where 2 people could be assassinated like that on live television. Then what did? He took the video, put it up on YouTube, he had a GoPro camera around his neck, so he filmed it. Put it on YouTube, sent a 29-page manifesto to ABC News, went on Twitter, whole world is against him. He was forced to do what he had to do, takes off. Once again, who stops him before he can kill anyone else? Law enforcement pulls him over later on that day, and he puts a bullet to his head. He commits murder at that point. And that ends the attack. That was the incident that caused me to research my Killer in the Next Cubicle project, which I just published part 1. I was at home. We were getting ready to do our first meeting of the WVPI in 2016. I asked my son Joseph, who's in the back, to come up with something, a cover, some piece of artwork. And he heard me talking about, you know, I'm hearing case after case. I'm seeing this as part of a national tragedy. This is happening across the United States. And I talked to, I don't know who it was, a business owner or someone who said, you know, workplace violence can't happen here, active shooter can't happen here, it can't happen to me. And I'm getting to know some of the families, and I said, do we really need to construct a memorial wall at the Department of Labor and put the names of all American workers who have been bullied and murdered and killed in the course and scope of employment? Is that what we need to do to understand what's going on and to be preventative? And my son heard me talking, and what he did is he created a little wall for me with the names of the first 36 innocent lives that were slaughtered at work, killed. And he presented it to me, and that's the cover of the book, and it's standing right there. Joseph, would you walk around and just take it? Little did I know that I would get to know the families of 2 of the people who were on that board, Ryan Burse and Caroline Nozel. This is a preventable tragedy, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not get to the point where we have more names, more names. How bad are things today? How bad is it? Let's look at Chris Hickson. Mr. Hickson was a war hero. He served in the military. He served proudly in our Navy. Michael, I believe you knew of him, or you know colleagues who know him, right? He was a great man. He survived not 1 but 2 tours of duty, Operation Desert Storm and Operation Desert Shield. Just imagine, you know, when we send our loved ones to the military, and certainly when they go overseas, we worry, we pray, we can't wait for them to come home. Well, he made it home, and I'm sure his family was so happy. And what happened? He got a job at Parkland as the athletic director, and he was shot and killed in an American high school right in our state. And right now, Senator, we have the distinction of having the worst school shooting in American history. We have surpassed Columbine. I would never have imagined that had happened. We lived in South Florida for a number of years. Stuart, Parkland is a great school. You want your children to go to Parkland. What do people think now when they hear of Stoneman Douglas, of this tragedy? And that's Mr. Hickson. proud war hero, survived 2 tours of duty in a hostile country, came back fine, and was killed in a high school in workplace violence. That was workplace violence. We lost 3 faculty members that day. Many others were wounded. Psychologically, what has that done? This is why we also, in our project, are concerned about school violence as well, because faculty and staff work in schools, and we also get our future workers, students from schools. So the WVPI has also now branched out into prevention and education to prevent further tragedies. This man should be here today. He should be here, and he wasn't. He's not here because of workplace violence. Doug Evans, who's a board member of the WVPI, is going to be presenting a little bit later on with Heath Yeager about active shooter episodes. I won't talk too much about it, only to say that we have a problem with active shooter in commerce, in workplaces, and in schools. The FBI tells us that 46% of all active shooter incidents happen in places of commerce, where we work, where our loved ones work, where we go to purchase goods that we need. That's where 46% of active shooter incidents happen. A total of 70%, according to the FBI, of all active shooter incidents happen in 1 of 2 places: schools, or businesses. That's where we stand. And I'm looking forward, Doug, to your presentation later on this morning on our active shooter discussion on what we can do with that topic specifically. Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Stuart talked about it this morning. What's OSHA? Who's OSHA? OSHA is the federal agency that was created by the OSHA Act of 1970, and they exist for one reason and one reason only, and that is to help to ensure safe workplaces for Americans. A court in the 3rd District here in the state of Florida has stated it is clear that workplace violence is a hazard prohibited by OSHA. So why are we not seeing the workplace bully that's tormenting Jody Jones? Jody Jones, 31-year-old, beautiful young lady. Please, we're gonna have a break in a little bit, go to the table there on the side, get some information about Jody, look at her, read about her story, see what her family's doing. Jody worked in Wisconsin. She was employed in healthcare. She had 2 beautiful young children at home. She was much loved by her family. And a bully just targeted her. And then it was more than one bully. We have mobbing then, where multiple people see a target. The CDC has determined that there is a correlation between bullying, and we don't call it suicide, we call it self-murder. She tried to go to work, to take care of her 2 children, and to do work that she really loved. And then her supervisor joined in on the bullying, and we have this bully boss situation, and we're seeing it with Kenny's case as well. It was the boss. This is the head of the organization who we're supposed to look to and model their behavior, who's engaging in the tormenting and the bullying of the worker. And this happened to Jody. It went on and on. She just couldn't take it anymore. The day before she was scheduled to receive what we believe was an unfair, bad performance review, that young lady, beautiful woman, committed self-murder. She just couldn't take it. This is going on every day across our country. We are privileged to have Jean here today, Kathy. Wish I could have known Jody. I'm sorry that I've come to know her now. We will not they've tried to do some work in Wisconsin. Jane, we got to work with this family to try to get some legislation. Jane's doing work in her daughter's name, as is Dr. Jim Nozel, in order to stop. This has to end. Bullying motivates no one to do anything. It motivates no one to do anything. We've got to stop it. And the courts have found workplace violence. If we see a bully who's walking around the workplace, who is endangering the lives of people who could be through physical threats sometimes, physical violence. Why are we not seeing that bullying the same way we would see a piece of machinery that's sparking and that's smoking? We recognize that to be, yes, a potential danger and a hazard, and we're going to lock out, tag out that piece of machinery. We advocate, we got to look at the workplace bullies in much the same way. There is a lot of information on our website from Dr. Tannenbaum, who is the forensic psychologist involved in our group, and he talks about the damage that bullying does. In a lot of cases, it's like PTSD, post-traumatic stress, depression, and it can lead to suicide from our Americans who would never contemplate doing it, ever, and that's why we call it self-murder. We have a court in the 3rd District who has stated now that OSHA sees workplace violence. And really what the court's talking about is the OSHA Act of 1970. This was the law that was passed December 29, 1970, that guarantees safe working conditions for all Americans. The OSHA Act, the Juarez court said that this also is workplace violence and prevented, and also the act bars that type of behavior. The OSHA Act is the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. It's commonly known as the OSHA Act, and this is where it all happens. You know, as in legislation, sometimes, you know, it's very, we attorneys, we love reading legislation, don't we? We love, Senator, to see what you guys whip up, you know, it can be very, very long, but in reading the legislation, federal law, this is where it all happens for the OSHA Act. It's the General Duty Clause. Section 5, each employer shall. It's not permissive. This is, we look at each word. It's not may, it's not might, it's shall. Shall furnish to each of his employees employment and a place of employment free from recognized hazards. We argue that bullies and other forms of workplace violence would violate this clause, and also in causes of action, when we see litigation, negligence. A lot of times when there is harassment or there's been a battery, and we now represent a client who's been battered at work, who's had his or her jaw broken by an employee, we've got to prove negligent hiring, sometimes negligent supervision. If only you would have looked into this employee more thoroughly, you would have found that he or she did the same thing in their prior 3 jobs, and they were terminated for bullying and for other misconduct. You hired this person, and that was who was standing on the other side of the desk when my client walked in and simply wanted to purchase a good or service from your organization. Your hazard cold-cocked my client. We've got to prove negligence. Duty, breach, causation, damages. Those are the 4 elements that a plaintiff must prove. And when we're talking about civil litigation, it is at the preponderance of evidence standard. We've got to prove those 4. My theory, we talked about this last night at our meeting, is this would help to prove element number 1, duty. You've got a duty, employer, under the OSHA Act of 1970 to not put these hazards out in your workplace that could then lead to what's happened to my client. Negligent retention, sometimes it's negligent security that we see in the lawsuits, wrongful death, stalking, cyber stalking, defamation of character. Remember what we said when we began, that OSHA says that words and threats, sometimes what I've seen is it's defamatory in nature, it's libel, it's person's an accountant and the coworker who's the bully says, oh, don't go over to Terry, Terry's a thief. Now if that's the SOX, the Sarbanes-Oxley accountant, who is responsible for producing the documents and has to go to the Securities and Exchange Commission, that is devastating to put that out on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else. Slander is verbal defamation, a false statement that injures someone. Libel is written. Here in this great state of Florida, as some of the other states have, we have what's called libel per se. That means depending on the position that you hold, if it goes to the heart of your position, to go out there and to publicize that an accountant is a thief, or that a law enforcement officer is a bully, that is devastating. That goes to the heart of what they do. You don't even have to prove damages. Damages are presumed with libel per se. These are the types of causes of action. When we go into civil court, as we do, it is the plaintiff's burden to prove all elements of whether it's negligent hiring, negligent supervision, if it's statutory in nature, we have to produce the evidence then. How is that done? It's done in discovery. Does anyone know what discovery is? In the United States, I've worked overseas, and if you've worked in other countries, people can't believe that we give each other documents in discovery. We give each other the evidence through the process known of as requests for production of documents, interrogatories. There's no such thing as it is the day of trial, and all of a sudden in bursts the witness with the document that's going to win the case. That never happens. It's all produced beforehand. If you're the plaintiff and you're suing for sexual harassment or for cyber stalking or whatever it is, negligence, you've got to prove your case at the preponderance of evidence, evidentiary standard. That is where it's 51% to 49%, the jury believes that this incident happened, more likely than not that it did not happen. Sometimes you've got to go to a higher element, which is clear and convincing evidence, which is not as high as, of course, we know in the criminal context, which we know for our law enforcement officials and those involved in security and safety, that before someone is charged with a crime, you got to produce the evidence and ensure that if you are bringing it to court, that you can meet that high, beyond a reasonable doubt burden. And the reason why sometimes we see criminals running around not being prosecuted is why? Because we don't have the evidence. We got to keep working on getting the evidence, because if they go to trial and they are acquitted, then what happens? We get double jeopardy attaching, and then they can never be prosecuted again for that particular crime. This is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Who talked about Me Too? Again, I've done that. Who talked about Me Too a little while ago? You know, we've talked about the Me Too movement this year, and we've talked about Title VII Civil Rights Act. You know the connection. This is not a new law that Me Too is challenging. This is a law that was passed, part of the civil rights initiatives of the 1960s, Title VII. We see President Lyndon Baines Johnson signing this into law July 2nd of 1964, and there's Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. overlooking him. This was landmark legislation, part of the sweeping initiatives of the 1960s. It applies to state governmental employers as well as private employees, and it applies every aspect of the employment life cycle. You could be subject to harassment. And we know already that OSHA defines harassment as being a form of workplace violence. So it can be in any part of the life cycle. The applicant could say when they went in and applied for a job they were harassed and could potentially sue that employer. It could happen any part of the application process during the employment life cycle. Anything can be challenged, up to and including separation under Title VII theory. If anyone wants to read the law, it's located at 88-352 of the federal statutes. The protected classes are race, color, sex, religion, national origin. To sue for harassment under Title VII, we have to prove that the bias, the bullying, if you will, was motivated by gender, by religion, by national origin. And then we have, well, what if the bullying is not related to protected class? And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Me Too, when something gets its hashtag on Twitter, we know that it is at the front of the American consciousness. Me Too opened up a discussion on harassment, specifically regarding sexual harassment, but we know that there can be other motivating reasons why the harassment in the workplace is taking place. It can be on the basis of age. If we start now with the bias and the jokes and the screensavers, and we start harassing people on the basis of age, because we know that people over the age of 40 can't really do anything, right? We know that that pilot for Southwest Airlines who landed that crippled jet, who's 56 years of age, you know, she should have been let go earlier because of this bias that we have for older Americans. A lot of older Americans are harassed on the basis of age, and that's where the workplace violence starts. We can have disability-based harassment under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. This woman, however, when you think of Me Too, who knows who Michelle Vincent is? Michelle Vincent, have you ever heard her talk about Harvey Weinstein and lately Bill Cosby and all of these actresses? This is the real hero for Me Too. Michelle Vincent worked in a bank. back in the mid-1980s, and she was being harassed at work very viciously by her supervisor. She worked at a place called the Meriter Savings Bank. And the supervisor, sexual jokes, you want this promotion, Michelle? The interview will be held at the Hilton Hotel, room 412. This type of stuff. So what she did, she was fired. Michelle Vinson sought out plaintiff's counsel, filed a complaint. Now, if you look at Title VII, because these harassment cases are brought under Title VII, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, says nothing about harassment. It talks about if you are discriminated against in the terms, conditions, privileges of employment on the basis of race, color, sex, religion, national origin, that's discrimination, nothing about harassment. What was happening in the courts is that you had people that were challenging harassment as being a violation of Title VII, and the Supreme Court agreed in 1986. And that's when, starting in 1986, that's harassment was deemed a violation of Title VII, and then we saw it applied to other laws like the ADA or the ADEA.